Kansas State just grabbed their biggest piece in the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rauh, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back, my everydayers. We have some basketball news to get into. Probably going to take us a couple episodes today. We're going to dive right into it, though, today, so be sure to stick onto the channel throughout the day. We're going to give you some nice digestible pieces to get you through your morning, your afternoon, and your evening commute. You can just join us all right here on Locked On Kansas State. Before we do that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We are very close. Well, we hit the 800 subscriber mark. I thank you. Now we're working towards the 900 goal. So let's get to that next step, folks. We're gaining. We're making that nice little push, and it's free. All you got to do is click that subscribe button. Helps me out, helps push it out to more Kansas State folks, and you're just doing me a favor. So thank you so much for doing that. And while you're there, hit that little like button as well. Leave a comment, leave a question. I'd love hearing from you about the topics that we're discussing on today's show. And today's show is all about the men's basketball team. And the next couple shows is probably going to be digging into the men's basketball team. I know we had the football portal just opened. We're going to get to that because we got some news to talk about as well. I got plenty of thoughts based on last press conference as well that I want to get to. I got a lot of shows lined up here, and we're going to be giving them all to you fairly quickly on this channel, so be sure to be tuning in. But the biggest piece so far in this offseason for the men's basketball team with Kansas State, I think finally happened. And in an offseason, and quite frankly, in a season that has been just disappointing for the men's squad, I think we finally have, dare I say, a sense of good news. Could this be the change in the right direction that they need? And is it enough, right? That'll probably ultimately be the biggest question when we're all said and done with this new building of this Kansas State basketball roster. But Akron transfer Nate Johnson commits to Kansas State. Huge pickup. This is a massive ad, and you might be thinking, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Akron? That's a MAC team. Why is that a big pickup? Well, let me explain. He is a baller. He's an absolute dog, and he is going to be really, I don't think the change of level going from MAC to Big 12 is going to be any type of a problem for him in Kansas State next year. I would not be surprised. Now, hopefully I'm wrong, because it means we add more pieces in the portal that are competing with this conversation, with this thought process I'm going to put out right now. But I would not be surprised when it's all said and done that Nate Johnson is not only the leader, the leading scorer, and just the all-around best player on Kansas State when next season comes around. I could totally see that happening. I hope I'm wrong, because that means that we added more pieces that can compete to that narrative, and then we can maybe have a more conversation. There are plenty of pieces that are still going to need to be filled, because there are multiple players that have left in this portal, which we're going to get to very shortly. But Nate Johnson has the tools, and he has proved it at the level when he was with the Akron Zips, helping them get to the NCAA tournament this past season as a 13 seed. Pretty good for a MAC team, right? And when you hear Akron, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear Akron is how terrible their football program has been for over the years. But you don't think basketball. You don't really think athletics when you think Akron right now, other than LeBron James, which never played there, but he's from Akron, right? The kid from Akron. But Nate Johnson was the MAC Player of the Year. He was the MAC Defensive Player of the Year. He was named to the MAC First Team in conference. He was named to the MAC All Defense First Team in the conference. Kind of makes sense if you win the Player of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year. And then he was the MVP of the MAC tournament. This kid knows how to play. He is a very good basketball player. Very good basketball player. He's the first player in Akron history to be named both the MAC Player and Defensive Player of the Year in the same season, and first player in the MAC overall since a guy named Bonzi Wells, if you've heard of him before. Really impressive what he did this past season. 6'3" junior, MAC Player of the Year, as I mentioned, averaged 14 points per game, just under 5 rebounds, and just under 4 assists in about 30 minutes per game. And you bring it back to this whole conversation about you got to find a way to, when you rebuild this team, and it's not a retool, it's a rebuild now. This whole idea of this Houston model is now done and gone. And we're going to dive into that later on today. Not in this particular episode segment, but later on today. So be sure to tune in the channel because I got some thoughts on that whole Houston model that I've really, the buy-in for me was there, but it's not there right now. I have some thoughts, and you should be sure to tune into that one. But this is a team that he got to the tournament, meaning this is a winning basketball program, and he led the way. Not only did he lead the way, he led his conference. And now he's going to come in and possibly be the dude for Kansas State this next season. You need somebody. David Castillo's not walking back through that door. Coleman Hawkins isn't walking back through that door. You need somebody to take the reins. And right now, he's the guy. We'll see what happens down the road, if anything changes with that. But, helping Akron get to 28 victories and getting to the NCAA tournament, that's a huge win. And him obviously leading the charge, knowing you have that kind of winning mentality is absolutely huge. I watched some tape on him before I hit record on this bad boy right here. And what I like about him right off the bat is that he is not afraid to drive the hoop. Not afraid. We kind of had that from Dug McDaniel last year, but I would hesitate to say that he was not afraid to go towards it, because there were some moments where he was hesitant, and then he did a lot of spot ups when he got close to the rim and then got lucky with his geometry off the backboard. He wouldn't finish, and that could be from his size. It could be from his strength. I'm not sure on Dug McDaniel's behalf, but a whole different ball game when looking at Nate Johnson in this one. He looks like he's looking for contact. He's looking to go to the line, and that proved it with stats number. He's averaging about 4 times going to the free throw line about 4 times per game. And I'll take that. And by the way, good free throw shooter, something that Kansas State struggled with mightily last season. Under 70% as a team, Kansas State was from the charity strike. Nate Johnson did very well from free throws as well. Not a great 3-point shooter, only about 30%, but you don't need that because you got Bashir that just came in. He's going to probably put up 15 shots per game, and most of them are going to come from behind the line. So I think you add a really good guard in this place that's not afraid to drive the lane. It's very good in isolation. I saw some great things with him on off-ball screens as well. And then, oh, by the way, we're putting him as the conference's best defensive player with Jerome Tang. And say what you want about Jerome Tang over these last couple seasons. And as I mentioned, I'm going to get into some thoughts about the coaching staff later on today about possible roster mismanagement. What do you think about this changes? But say what you want about him. One thing you can't take away from him is his ability to coach defense and coach up players on the defensive level. Adding in a conference, not only player of the year, but defensive player of the year, and coming into Kansas State under Jerome Tang, we might be talking about the potential when we get to Big 12 Media Days. We might be looking at the potential Big 12 newcomer of the year. I mean, would that shock you? If you're bringing in a player that was a MAC player of the year and defensive player of the year coming into a new conference, I mean, he's got to be up there right now as a front runner for that award coming into the media days. Now, obviously, that's a preseason award. That doesn't really matter, but it's interesting, and it shows that there's a little bit of respect from the conference. Because right now, what has Kansas State really earned over the last few years? What have they really earned since that Elite Eight trip? Where are they at in respect as the men's basketball program? I'm not talking about the university as a whole, because that's a completely different story. But as a men's basketball program right now, over the last 2 seasons, especially this last season, when you spent money, when you went out there and you literally put the money where your mouth was and you couldn't back it up. Is this enough? Is Nate Johnson going to be enough? Obviously, he's the third pickup in this portal so far. We're going to dive into more as well. We got later on today. I want to dig into it. We already talked about Bashir. We did not get to the other transfer in this one, but Nate Johnson was the most recent, so I wanted to lead off with today's show on this one. Is it enough? Now, obviously, there's a lot more to go, right? There's a lot more to go than just what we're going to see from Nate Johnson, from Bashir, and from McGriff, the second portal guy that we're going to talk about later on today. Because right now there are currently 7 open scholarships. In Kansas State's top 10 scorers, if you put it by points per game, are no longer going to be on the roster heading into the next season. That's why I talked about this Houston model's long gone. Again, we'll talk about that later on. But how do you fulfill your top 10 scorers? Something that really didn't do good in scoring anyways this past season, only averaged 71 points per game. But your leading scorer heading into the season right now, assuming that we're not going to get a waiver for Max Jones, because I feel like that's not going to happen anyways. Your leading scorer right now on the roster from last season is David Castillo, under 2.5 points per game. Oh, and by the way, he only averaged 10 minutes per game. Got a lot of holes to fill. And 3 players in the portal is not going to just do that right now. So we're going to dig into that and talk about what's next here. And really what's next is what we got to dive into right here is who left and how do we fill that? Starting with CJ Jones, the latest that left from Kansas State. We'll dive into that right here next on Locked On Kansas State. Today's episode of Locked On Kansas State is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get your playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices up on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Count me in. Here's why I use Game Time. It's the last-minute deals that are a absolute game winner for me. You save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, comedy, concerts, theater, you name it. I just checked it out for a Seattle Kraken game as I was up here on the West Coast, and Game Time just secured me in. I'd pay $50 for parking, but for the tickets, I was all for it. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. We're diving into the college basketball world, the men's basketball world, portal chatter, if you will, because there's a lot to discuss. And I have a feeling that we might be diving in like 3 full episodes on just my thoughts on this men's basketball team today. And might be how we finish the month with just multiple episodes each day on the weekdays, filling it out. Now, obviously, excuse me, my nose is running. It's been a crazy week for sinuses. Getting over it. My voice is finally back, if you remember from last episode. But I think that we're at a point right now, looking at the men's basketball squad, where I'm just wanting something more to happen. Picture if you're a guy into memes, if you're guy or girl, if you're in the memes, and you like the one where Simba's poking with the stick, says do something, asking that, come on, wake up, do something. That's what I think right now when it comes to this Kansas State basketball squad. Because we are getting more bad news by the minute, and then you maybe get a little bit of feel good right here. You get Brennan Hawson leaving, who commits to Iowa, by the way. another loss for Jerome Tang when it comes to Ben McCollum. Brennan Hawson and Bennett Sturts are going to be teammates, but unfortunately not in Manhattan this next season. Dug McDaniel leaves. That was a dagger. That one stung a little bit. I'm not going to lie. I wasn't expecting that one. I thought that there was a good feeling between Jerome Tang and Dug McDaniel towards the end of the season. He was starting to turn into that point guard of the future, I thought. And Jerome Tang continued to talk about how important it was to have a point guard you can trust on the court. It's almost like having another coach on the court. And he mentioned Kansas as being someone who did that really well over the last couple seasons. Can't do that if you have to replace your point guard year after year. I think that's where the whole idea of this Houston model just fell out of my head once Dug McDaniel left, for the record. And then you have McGee, the freshman, who opens his recruitment. He's no longer commits. Verbally is committed to Kansas State. So you really only have one freshman coming in Wilson right now, coming into this new roster. So we're right back to square one that we were for the last two seasons. Having a tough time building up recruiting, having a big deal with freshman class. Can Coach Tang have some production? Can he build through recruitment? Obviously, the question has yet to be determined, but it's leaning in the wrong direction. And then when you talk about, can you keep them around? Well, obviously that hasn't helped either. Now, how many of them were told to leave and how many just chose to leave? That's the big question that we'll never know, probably. But you have to assume that you wanted a lot of these players to stick around after continually preaching that you wanted this Houston model, this retention model, if you will, of these players. And now you have 3 players staying after CJ Jones declared for the transfer portal on Monday. I mean, that's tough. And it goes back to that conversation that we just had, that now with CJ Jones transferring, Kansas State has now lost, and this is from 24/7. It's Ryan Gilbert, and he put out this amazing tweet that kind of puts it in perspective for you. With CJ Jones transferring, K-State has now lost 92.5% of its scoring from last season. Now, again, scoring wasn't even that good last year. They struggled mightily in multiple games. And now you're telling me you got to replace over 90% of that subpar offense? Could that be a good thing? Could that be a bad thing? I feel it could be both. It could be a really great thing. You have to fill 7 more scholarships. Also bad thing, you have to fill 7 more scholarships. In a time where NIL has never been more on the forefront in all of college athletics, with this new settlement thing coming out on Capitol Hill that keeps getting crazier and crazier. We're going to dive into that in an episode very soon, because that news is changing every minute. And we got to make sure you're informed here on Locked On Kansas State, because that directly impacts not just this university, but all of college athletics. But now you got to replace 92.5% of your scoring after losing CJ Jones, Dug McDaniel, Brennan Hawson. Obviously losing Coleman Hawkins and David Castillo. Max Jones is gone. Chor, he's gone. Buddy Rich is gone. Ugana Nesio, he's gone. Bay Fall, he's gone. Right? So all you really have is David Castillo, you have Moby, and you have Taj Manning. As of right now, of this recording, there is still a couple days left in the transfer portal, in the window for the basketball world. So as of right now, those are the 3 you have returning. And then a couple transfers. Still not enough, though. Still need a lot more work to do. Tyreek Smith, obviously another name that we don't bring up a lot because he came over in the other portal window and will be eligible to play, assuming he gets a waiver as well, because there is a possibility of him wondering, I guess there's some sort of waiver, but I'm guessing that one is more in favor, because I don't think he would have transferred in the first place if he wasn't going to get a waiver. So I guess we'll count him at the moment. So where does this all line up? losing CJ Jones, losing Dug McDaniel, losing Brennan Hawson. It doesn't feel great because this is, again, the third season in a row where you have to rebuild. The first season kind of just was kind of what it was. A lot of players leaving. NIL was on full blast, right? A lot of players losing eligibility. Wasn't like that last year. It seemed like it was a almost asked to leave kind of conversation. And then we'll find out more soon if that was the same case this year, which I don't think it was, for the record. We didn't have Jerome Tang preaching every single week during that rough stretch, that rough period of him trying to build this team, about this Houston model, about this retention model. We didn't have that 2 years ago. We didn't have that last year. We had that this year, and we still got the same result of players leaving in the transfer portal. David Castillo, Moby, and Taj. That's it. Those are the three players who are eligible return from last season that did not enter the transfer portal. That's our production. So what's next? Where do we go from here? Let's dive into that while we finish this one up right here on Locked On Kansas State. Today's episode of Locked On Kansas State is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least two players' projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, Prize Picks keeps you in every game and keeps that game exciting. My favorite thing to do is building that lineup. This week, I'm picking Aaron Judge for more than one home run. I think that's really easy. And count me in for Bobby Witt Jr. as well for more than one stolen base. It's that easy. I mean, you kidding me? Getting Aaron Judge and Bobby Witt together. They both battled for the AL MVP last year. Perfect time to get that in for Prize Picks. It's fast and simple. Setting up a lineup takes less than 60 seconds. And when you win, that payout is quick, safe, and secure. What better than getting the money you won fast back in your pocket? Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's LOCKEDONCollege as the code for $50 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Welcome back into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Thank you so much again for listening. We're diving right back into this men's basketball conversation where we are starting once again from nuts and bolts and building it back up and hoping that we get a different result this time, because I'm pretty sure the definition of insanity is expecting a different result, but doing the same thing over and over again. And that's exactly what we're doing right now with Kansas State over the last couple seasons. We are breaking it down to the nuts and bolts, hoping it works, hoping that this team can have some buy-in and actually gel together after having a season of never working or playing with each other. Struggling in non-conference, wondering what's going wrong, blaming it on the coach, blaming it on the players, and then, by the way, they finally figure it out, but it's too late. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like something that you have heard before or possibly even seen? Because I feel like that's exactly what we just went through this last season. And if I need to remind you, the result was not promising. It resulted in not making it to the NCAA tournament, nor even postseason play. Now, we probably could have played in the Crown if we wanted to, but we didn't go. And probably for good reason. So where do we go from here? With three players who are eligible to return from last season, David Castillo, Moby, and Taj, that's it. And there's no saying that either Moby or Taj can leave. I think David Castillo is going to stay because he was one that was very adamant and very vocal about saying he's going to stick around when the season was over. There wasn't any other player that did that after the season. So I think David Castillo is sticking around. I think he's going to be hopefully a 4-year development project. I think he can eventually become the starting point guard. I don't think he should be the starting point guard, at least heading into the season. I know he started some games this past year. I think he has the capability of doing so. I'd like his shooting to be more consistent. Maybe he surprises us this offseason, and I can eat my words here. That'd be great. I'd love that to happen. I've gone on record in past episodes saying that we have a star in the making with David Castillo when he was lighting it up in the middle of the season, when they were starting him over Dug McDaniel. I was all for it. A freshman? You kidding me? Yes, count me in. But I think there's obviously some development that needs to happen there. And obviously, going from your freshman season to your sophomore year, that's a huge step in your development. Hopefully, he can do that. Maybe with everybody else leaving and them having just all these other transfers, the coaching staff will take a more aggressive approach with David Castillo because he's the familiar face in the room. Maybe that's a possibility. Maybe that means that David Castillo's game takes a huge step forward this next season, and he is your starting point guard, and then we don't really have much to talk about with the need for a point guard for the next couple seasons after losing Dug McDaniel. Because although we added in Nate Johnson and Bashir as guards, great shooters, one drives the lane, one's outstanding from behind the arc, one's great with defense, one's terrible with defense, so Jerome Tang's got some work to do there. No, neither of those two are really point guards. So, I mean, it would be beneficial if David Castillo could really step up and do his thing as a point guard, a true point guard for Kansas State. Because right now, if you don't want to count the transfers, David Castillo is your best player returning. So having him as your point guard of the future, if that means he starts day one of this new regime, then so be it. But I do think that they got to still at least add one more true point guard to the roster mix. I know they're still deep in the international market. We're going to dive into that later on today's shows because the time is ticking. And I know that there's not truly a expiration date, if you will, when it comes to the international market, because they don't have to enter the portal. It still is beneficial to get this roster done as soon as possible, because again, they have struggled so many times now early in the season, and it's killed them. It's taken away their tourney hopes right off the bat. So that's where I'll leave you today, at least for this morning. With Nate Johnson coming in, should we be excited? Absolutely. But I think we need to be cautious. And although I tried to dive into this episode today being optimistic, if you noticed, it immediately shifted. Because I guess I had, different feelings about this past season. And I feel like I'm not the only one about this past year. About being, I don't want to say the word promise, but being hopeful about a potential retention model, not having to go through this again. This is stressful. This is tiring. This is exhausting. Knowing that you have this roster that you get excited about and you get invested in, and then all of a sudden you have to watch them leave and go to other schools and likely perform well. And then you're sitting here looking good in lavender, but you are not in the NCAA tournament because you're seen as a stepping stone over the past couple seasons. Needs to get fixed. We'll be back here with another episode later on today, still digging into this conversation. Plenty more to talk about. We're going to dig into McGriff, the transfer out of UNCW. We're going to talk about how this lineup still continues to look and what still needs left to be done. And then I want to dive more into what I'm hearing from this international market, because there are some rumblings, and obviously we got to fill this roster somewhere. So we'll do that next later on here. Be sure to tune in. If you haven't subscribed, thank you so much. Do that right now. I'd really appreciate that, because we are building up to hopefully 1,000 subscribers soon, but I'll take that 900 before we do that. So thank you for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Draft, Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. As your favorite collegiate players get ready for the next level, get your latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Please like the video, please subscribe, and this has been Locked On Kansas State.